Senator from Oklahoma.
Ask me as consent that I be recognized as if in morning business for such time
Senate
as I
quorum
shall
call.
consume. Ask me as consent to dispense with the
Without objection. Senator's recognized.
Now ask you as consent that I be recognized for such time as I would consume as if in morning business.
Without objection.
All right. Now I sense another Senate. Are you wanting to be recognized? Because I don't want to take you.
Whenever the senator is through. I wanted to speak. I was sorry, haven't been answered. Yes.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I want to begin with wishing everyone a happy new year, and I'm hoping everyone had a great Christmas. We did. And I have three observations I want to make consistent with 2018. First, here in Washington, we're experiencing some really frigid temperatures this week. And let me tell you, in Oklahoma, it was even colder there than it was here. And that's unusual, but it was. And so we had to experience record-breaking, bitter, cold weather, and it was pretty miserable. But great warm people, and it's wonderful, wonderful Christmas, and New Year's, and everything is good. But many parts of the country saw 2017 with the record-breaking cold weather. And meteorologists are predicting more record-breaking cold for the rest of the week and the beginning of next week. Now, I bring this up to highlight the fact that President Trump joked last week on a Twitter. He said, quote, "We could use a little bit of that good old global warming." I say it a little bit differently, Mr. President. I say, where is global warming when we need it? Because we sure needed it this last week. Well, the alarmists, they went crazy on this. Let me explain what an alarmist is. Alarmist believes that global warming is coming due to anthropogenic gases and the world's coming to an end. And so they're the ones who jumped on that and they actually went crazy. And and for not understanding the difference between weather and climate. We keep saying the same thing. Every time we go through one of these periods that we experience, then again, we have the same thing that comes up and we talk about it. No, climate is always changing. We understand that. We actually had a unanimous vote on the floor of the Senate. Yeah, climate changes. It's always changed. I mean, historically, scripturally, it's always been changed. We understand that. But anyway, I remember I've been criticized with the same thing. You might remember that I brought a snowball here in a couple of Februarys ago to show that we're not experiencing climate change when it snows in February after we've been told for decades that soon we won't have any snow again. And that was really kind of a fun thing because I remember I had some of the pages lined up and I said, which one of you guys is the most athletic of all of them? And it happened that the guy that raised his hand, they all pointed to him and said, he's the guy who's most athletic. And he was from Oklahoma, my state of Oklahoma. So tell you what I do. I take a snowball, I throw it up there at the presiding officer. You intercept it. If you don't intercept it, it's going to be a mess. And he intercepted it. It was beautiful. But nonetheless, you got to sometimes quit being so serious about all this stuff and realize that there are things that are happening that people need to talk about that are for real. On the point, you might remember Al Gore made some pretty outrageous claims. He said that, now here, enough years have gone by that he said by the deadlines that he drew out there, he said that global warming was going to cause all the snow to melt from Mount Kilimanjaro. I was not far from Kilimanjaro just a few weeks ago. Snow's still there. And he said that by 2016, the Arctic would be completely melted. And then he talked about all the polar bears would be gone and they'd be extinct. Well, none of this stuff happened. And I think we realized that. The only thing that happened is, according to an article in the New York Times, Al Gore has now become the first environmental billionaire out there. So some things like that are happening. Anyway, the critics were quick to jump on my case when he did that, and I had to remind him, there's a difference between weather and climate. But those same critics also were quick to jump on weather events when it supports their cause. Whenever there's a particularly bad tornado in Oklahoma, and we have bad tornadoes in Oklahoma, I've never seen a good tornado. There have been people to witness them, and I'm immediately asked if this will cause me to change my mind about global warming or climate change. And I said, why? You know, alarmists have been insisting for a long period of time that their idea is the world's coming to an end. It's coming to an end because of global warming. Well, after this past hurricane season, I was repeatedly asked if I thought climate change was to blame for the tragic natural disasters. And again, I responded, you alarmists have been insisting that weather isn't climate, and so why change your position now? Well, I'm not surprised that we have hurricanes during hurricane season, we have tornadoes during tornado season, and we have cold and snow during the winter. That's not just unique to my state of Oklahoma, that's all over the country, all over the world. And we hear constantly that natural disasters are getting worse, yet when you look at the data, there's no support for that conclusion. When Category 4 Hurricane Harvey hit Texas and other Gulf states, it was the first major hurricane to make landfall in the continental United States for 12 years. Now, the next largest gap between major hurricanes actually lasted only 8 years, and that was in the 1860s. Tornado activity has also been down in recent years, with the latest data of 2016 showing a continued low number of tornadoes across the United States. I might say that's also true for my state of Oklahoma. Since we're experiencing record-breaking cold last week and this week in much of the country, we're once again reminded that weather is not climate. So what is happening on the climate front? If you listen to the alarmists, now keep in mind who the alarmists are. They're the ones that are saying that the world's coming to an end because of global warming. And, but they'll say that we all will be burned to death and temperatures are skyrocketing. Over the last couple of years, we've been told that it was the hottest year on record. We've been scolded by the jet-setting Hollywood celebrities about our carbon footprint. But again, if you actually look at the data, there isn't support for all of this hysteria. 2014, 2015, and 2016 were touted by the Obama administration as the hottest years on record, but the increases are well within the margin of error. In 2016, NOAA, that's NOAA, said the Earth warmed by 0.04 degrees Celsius, and the British government pegged it at 0.01 Celsius. However, the margin of error is 0.1 degree, not 0.01. So it's all well within, statistically, it's just meaningless. And it's below the doom and gloom temperature predictions from all the various models from consensus scientists. Now, Stephen Koonin, this is kind of interesting. Stephen Koonin was in the Obama administration. He was Undersecretary for Science at the Department of Energy. So he was an appointee by President Obama. And he said, and this is a quote, he said, the Obama administration relentlessly politicized science and aggressively pushed a campaign about that politicized science. In other words, he's using that to make a case that is not true. And this comes out of his own administration. In September of 2017, the University of Alabama at Huntsville, their climate scientists, John Christie and Richard McNiber, published a study showing no acceleration in global warming for the last 23 years. Their research shows that if you remove the climate effects of 2 volcanic eruptions and the El Nino and La Nina systems that occurred over the last 38 years, there has been no change since the early 1990s to the rate of warming, and that model predictions from the IPCC are overstated by about double. Now, keep in mind who the IPCC is. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's the United Nations. They're the ones that started all this stuff about 40 years ago, and they're the ones whose scientists have been completely discredited. I always remember that when that took place, it was in Copenhagen. They had one of the big annual United Nations parties over there, and I remember back before leaving to go over there, the Lisa Jackson at that time was the Obama director of the EPA, and she knew that I was going to go over there and just tell the truth to all these people. And And so I asked her the question. This is on public record. I said, now tell me, in the event that I leave town, and if you're going to start regulating global warming, you have to first declare that there is an urgency to this thing, and you have to use a scientific declaration. What science will you use? And she said, we're going to use the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's the United Nations. Well, as luck would have it, just a matter of days after that, the IPCC was totally rejected. I mean, you remember, everyone remembers that, how they had been caught rigging the information in terms of weather, and it was really quite a mess. So anyway, the eruptions cooled the Earth with going back now to the Christie explanation that just came out the other day. The volcanic eruptions cooled the Earth when ash, soot, and debris entered the atmosphere and sunlight was reflected away. Said the eruptions happened relatively early in our study period, which pushed down temperatures in the first part to the data set, which caused overall record to show exaggerated warming trends. So anyway, we have two respected climate scientists using the sound science to discredit the so-called consensus scientists. And by the way, there are hundreds of other scientists out there. One of them is in MIT, one of the best-known scientists, climate scientists, is a guy named Richard Lindzen. And he's been very outspoken in this. So every time you hear people talking about there's a consensus of science, I think we know better. Then I remember the media does not share the studies, and so quite often the media doesn't say anything about some of the failed practices that are being used to draw us to these conclusions. I'm thankful that we have a president and an administration that refuses to handcuff our economy with policies that based on overblown headlines. And so while we continue to have tornadoes in May, hurricanes in the fall, and bitterly cold temperatures in the winter, we must remember that the climate has been stable over the last few decades, and we shouldn't give in to the fear mongers that are out there. Rather, we should focus on actual threats to American families, like the regime in Iran that calls for death to America or death to Israel. 1 week ago today, the men and women of Iran began protesting in the streets. And what began as people speaking out against a sluggish economy and the economic growth that does not exist in Iran, the people finally got fed up with it. Now, you keep in mind that the country of Iran is still recognized as the financial backbone of terrorism throughout the world. So the media in Iran has reported that over 20 individuals have died in these protests. They're protesting for their own freedom, and over 450 have been arrested since the regime's violent crackdown against the protesters. Now, these protesters, let's keep in mind what they're protesting for. They just want some of the freedoms that they know other countries have. And right now they are in a state where they don't see any other way to make this happen. In an act that defies transparency and democratic principles, the regime excuse me, has shut down social media and messaging sites, limiting the flow of information about the protests. In other words, they're not letting the outside world know what's going on there. Iran clearly thinks that they can get away with this flagrant disregard of human rights, and why shouldn't they? Under the Obama administration, Iran was able to violently crack down on democratic protesters in 2009, continue the ballistic missile tests in violation of UN resolutions and finance terrorist organizations in the region without international condemnation or repercussions. Remember, Iran is still the financial backbone of terrorism in that part of the world. Well, just last month we learned how the Obama administration, under the law enforcement efforts against Hezbollah drug trafficking operations. Hezbollah is well known to be a proxy of Iran. Everybody knows that. And it's a terrorist organization. But rather go after the financial backing of a known terrorist organization, Obama swept it under the rug. His focus was on creating and then protecting the flawed Iran nuclear deal. The deal that he promised, that Obama promised, would end Iran's aggressive behavior in the region and promote reforms in Iran through economic opportunity. Well, the actual results of the deal never have been more clear. The ruling elite of Tehran continues their aggressive behavior by putting their nation's resources towards supporting Assad's regime in Syria, testing ballistic missiles, and committing human rights abuses against women and religious minorities. It's no wonder that freedom-loving men and women in Iran seek meaningful change. Fortunately, President Trump has already been clear that the United States stands behind the right of Iranian citizens for peaceful protest. Maybe the Ayatollah didn't get the message from President Trump when he was sworn in last year. Under President Trump, America is the leader of the free world again, standing up for common human dignity and democratic values. He's backed up his support with action, weighing additional sanctions against the regime and having UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who's doing a great job, by the way, call for an emergency UN meetings to address the human rights concerns. In support of his efforts, I look forward to working with the President and his administration to enact any needed sanctions against Iran in order to advance freedom and democracy. Now, Mr. President, I mentioned that there are three things that I wanted to address for this new year. The third is tax reform. We're approaching 1 year under the President Trump's administration, and we're already seeing the benefits of the tax reform and the cutting of harmful regulations. The comprehensive tax reform legislation passed by Congress last month will allow American families to keep more of their hard-earned money. We've been talking about this for a long time. It would make it easier for businesses to grow and hire more hard-working people. Already, businesses across the country, like the American Airlines, Southwest Airlines, Boeing, Comcast, Wells Fargo, AT&T, and in my state of Oklahoma, the Express Employment Professionals headquartered in Oklahoma City have announced investments in their employees and businesses as a result of the tax bill. Now, clearly, the tax reform will compound the economic growth that we've already seen result from the President Trump's consistent efforts to cut regulations in his first year. Following the severe economic recession of 2008 and uncertainty in the future, many companies have chosen not to invest their business in their employees. Now, under the Obama administration, federal bureaucrats unleashed hundreds of regulations that increased the cost of doing business, stifling job creation. And the results is obvious. According to a report by the Heritage Foundation, by 2015, Obama's regulations were costing the taxpayers over $100 billion a year. With these limitations on job creators, it is no surprise that the average GDP growth under President Obama was just about a little bit over 1.5%, no matter that the previous history in the United States is actually consistently about 3%. In less than 1 year, by directing federal agencies to delay, withdraw, or invalidate 1,600 planned regulatory actions, President Trump has done what President Obama was unable to do in 8 years, and that is restore the confidence of the American business community. Now, he did this by reversing the Obama regulations. I have one. In fact, I've taken the time to list these regulations that were putting people out of business. And I ask unanimous consent that this be inserted in the record at the conclusion of my remarks today.
Without objection.
And one of the things you can do, there are two ways you get rid of regulations. One is you can do it through executive actions. I think everyone knows what that is. But the more difficult thing is to do it through Congressional Review Act resolutions that are passed. That's the CRAs. And if we're able to do this, I was very proud that the first CRA that we were able to get passed was one that I introduced. And it was one that was very popular. It was a rule that was put in during the Obama administration that said that that we were, if we were in competition with a domestic oil or gas company, with China or some other company, that we had to give to them all of how we put together our playbook, which would put the United States companies at a disadvantage. Well, we went ahead and did a CRA on that, and I was very proud to do that. But I think that people should look at these and realize the great results that we did, that we had as a result of doing away with the over-regulations. So I have the list here, and this is something that people are not really aware of. But on January 1st, the New York Times even recognized the positive effects of the President's deregulatory agenda. Now, this doesn't very often happen with the New York Times, but they reported on a new wave of optimism in American business. Now, listen to this. The Trump effect, now this is what the New York Times are calling it, very appropriately I might add, are rightfully calling it, is beginning to translate to investment in new plants, equipment, and facility upgrades that bolster economic growth. Now this is the New York Times. This is, and they continue by saying, quote, with the lowest unemployment rate in 17 years, we're also seeing the Trump effect, again, that's their term, on wages as business invest their workforce by raising wages to keep attracting skilled employees. This week, the Wall Street Journal reported how cities like Minneapolis have seen a 4% wage growth in the last year, the highest growth in 6 years. And I'm confident we're going to hear more success stories around the country. The proof is in the numbers. For the first 2 quarters of the Trump administration, the first 2 full quarters, starting with the second quarter of 2017, the ones that he would have control over, we have increased the growth, the GDP growth, to over 3%. That's pretty amazing, over 3%. Now, this is from the average of about 1.5%. Now, what's important about this is for each 1% increase in economic activity or the GDP, that translates into an additional revenue coming into the government of about $3 trillion over a 10-year period. And that's why back in 1981 and the 1981 tax cut under Reagan, they started out the year with the total revenue coming in to be $469 billion. But then as a result of the tax reductions, the increased activity in economic activity increased it to $750 billion. So we actually increased our revenue by decreasing the individual rates. So finally, the Made in America economy is running at full speed again. And we have 3 huge success stories of the Trump administration. Number 1, eliminating the Obama over-regulations and freeing up businesses. The second one, reestablishing America as a leader in the free world by reversing the Obama policy of appeasement. You know, Hiram Mann said, "No man survives when freedom fails. The best men rot in filthy jails. And those who cry to appease, appease, are hanged by those they try to please." And the third thing is the tax reform, the first tax reform in 3 decades. So with that, I want to say Happy New Year. 2018 is going to be great, and I yield the floor.